top of that, they've got the one-child policy. So you put those two together, and the result is the death of the country. We're near the end.
Gee, what steps are they taking to mitigate any of that, or are they just blindly going forward?
No, they're not being blind about it. This is one of the last things that was decided before Xi ushered the last competent people out of the room. I like the product placement there.
There it is. It's back. Is it in? Bam. End of the world is just the beginning. So it's been out for a year. So I want to talk to you about that too. The changes that have happened over the last. See that? There it is. Look at that. Everybody should read this book for sure.
So the Chinese went to a 2-China policy and then a 3-child policy, and then they did away with it all. Yeah. And there's now no restrictions. And in fact, the Population Management Bureau, I can't remember the name of it, that's responsible for enforcing population controls, is now basically a neonatalist arm of the government who helps people have kids and helps them to try to find childcare and things like that. So, from a policy point of view, they've done more or less what they can without a complete upheaval, but it's too late. Too many people are living in condos, and so their birth rate is going down, 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 down. And then we had 3 years of COVID. And one of the many, many, many outcomes of COVID is when you're not sure of your economic future, you're less willing to have a kid. And the specific Chinese flavor of that is when you can't see your mistress every week, which is apparently really popular, your marriage falls apart.
Oh.
So we've had this
marital advice. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
So some
yeah, I know. So apparently we've had this collapse in marriage rates in China during COVID. And then, of course, 3 years of lower birth rates. So from 2018 until the last data we have in 2021, the birth rate dropped by like 40%, even though they were liberalizing the laws on having kids at the same time. So it's just, we're so far past the point of no return now.
And so what does Taiwan give them if they were to re-annex, retake?
Yeah, so China, about the only advantage would be a mild strategic advantage, because Taiwan is part of the first island chain, and those line of barrier islands that are populated that separate China from the rest of the world. And China's never been able to penetrate through that in a sustained way, certainly not in a corporate manner. But they don't get semiconductors because the Chinese can't operate their own semiconductors. So if they suddenly found themselves in possession of the world's most advanced system, they wouldn't know what to do with it. It would be like a spaceship landing in the United States, and we'd give it a good try, but we wouldn't have any idea what we're doing. It would lead to a military conflict that they couldn't win. Remember, the Chinese Navy, while it has a lot of vessels, under combat conditions, most, over 80%, can only sail about 400 miles from shore. And their oil comes from 5,000 miles away. So someone, Japan, the United States, Australia, Taiwan, Vietnam, India, someone will put 2 destroyers in the Indian Ocean basin and cut the energy line, and that is literally all he wrote. Also remember that China is the world's largest importer of food, and they import the vast majority of the inputs that allow them to grow their own. So you'd be looking at a deindustrialization collapse that would trigger a famine in a matter of months. And as of 4 years ago, the Chinese government realized that. There's an open question now with Xi purging the system so much of whether or not he actually buys into the propaganda. We just don't know. One of the beautiful, beautiful things of the Ukraine war is the United States has demonstrated that it's listening in to every meeting and every phone call and reading every email and every blog that Putin touches. You can't do that with Xi because he doesn't speak with anyone. There's no one to hack, so we just don't know.
What does it do to us if there's a prolonged conflict over Taiwan? Does it do something to our semiconductor industry, like maybe make it revitalize it here? Or are we looking at that anyway?
Yes and no. So semiconductors are a really, really messy space. You've got 3 main types. You've got your 10 nanometer and smaller. Those are your super advanced ones. Those are used in most AI programs. So that would include things like satellites. That would include things like self-driving. At the bottom, you've got your 90 nanometers and bigger. And these are almost analog chips. They can only do like 1 or 2 things. So like the chip that's in your smart bulbs would be one of those. And then in the middle, 90 to 10, everything else, that's the vast bulk of the market. And that's everything from aerospace to automotive to power regulation. The really, really good stuff, the top 10%, requires a constellation of almost everyone, 13 different countries. So you're getting lenses from the Germans, light sources from the Californians, laser etching systems from the Dutch. The wafer fabrication comes from the Japanese. Americans do the design, and they're manufactured in primarily Taiwan and to a lesser degree Korea. And if a single country falls out of that constellation, none of it works because there is no backup for any of it.
Okay.
So if we do have a war in Taiwan that is meaningful in any way, we lose the good chips. And that means AI goes into a winter for at least a decade.
Oh.
On the low end, the 90 and bigger, the dumb
Yeah.
chips, those are almost exclusively China.
Okay.
So when China goes, no matter how China goes, we lose the Internet of Things and everything that comes from that. Everything in the middle is actually significantly more durable. The chips aren't as advanced. Their production comes from different places. There's some in Europe, there's some in Japan, there's some in South Korea, there's a lot in the United States. In fact, by value, the United States By value, the United States produces more chips than the rest of the world put together. Those were that 10 nanometer and higher. Those are really expensive chips, but there's just not a lot of them. And the 90 nanometer and below, there's a lot of them, but they're just not very expensive. So everything in the middle for your cars, for your planes, and so on, we're probably okay with a China meltdown or even a Taiwanese capture or destruction.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it's immune to all the shocks that are going on out there. There's a lot, especially with the Ukraine war, I'm concerned about. But we're not really worried about the infrastructure or the industrial plant. And, you know, in this world, that's about as good as the news gets.
Jeez, I know the title of your book wouldn't suggest this, but you are actually hopeful about the future when it comes to the United States in particular.
We're going to be really good. I mean, we're pretty good now. We're already the world's largest economy, highest standard of living, energy secure, food secure, blah, 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 blah. 10 years from now, once we've built out the industrial plant to replace a lot of these places like China that are falling away, we're also going to have lower costs of production and more secure production and higher employment. And the employment here will be fueling the factories that are selling the products to the people who are consuming here, and will be broadly immune to international shocks. This is a good story, but the path from here to there, there are a lot of bumps in it.
So can you take us back to that summer and talk a little bit about where all this kind of started and why?
Sure. So let's deal with it first from the strategic point of view, and then we can deal with it from the economic point of view. So one of the things that the Europeans refuse to admit is after the American Civil War with Reconstruction, while the United States was kind of off by its own, it was digesting a continent. And over the course of Reconstruction and knitting the country back together and conquering the West, we became not just the largest economy in the world. We were that before the Civil War. We became a larger economy than the British Empire, the French Empire, and the German Empire combined. And so when World War II came around, if you're willing to step back and ignore the emotion and just look at the numbers, there was no way that the war was going to win in any way other than American domination. And so once we got to 1944, and it was clear that the Soviets had broken the back of the Germans in the East, and that the Normandy and the Italian invasions were going to be successful,